Hey guys, I'm Luke Moyle, and today I'll be taking you through my week 3 to 4 breakdown. In the beginning of week 3, I had a meeting with Jeremy, and we spoke about different ways to introduce characters and such, or how different directors and everything do it. Because I know from my previous storyboards, I used Overwatch as a reference, and even from making my storyboards, I felt that they felt really really video gamey and really fast, which is not really the feeling that I was going for. So yeah, we spoke about Lord of the Rings, how Aragorn was introduced, but we ended up getting onto the topic of Steven Spielberg, and here is sort of two references, two techniques he uses, which is fraction and action. Fraction being, showing a character in bits and pieces. You show, like Indiana Jones for reference, his map, and then the brim of his hat, and his whip, and eventually going to like a full body shot with him. For reference, in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where he whips the guy's gun out of his hand, and he walks out of the darkness, revealing himself. The second one being action, where, in The Dark Knight, the Joker walks up and puts his gun in this guy's mouth and, starts rambling about whatever he does, and, you get that feeling of, oh, this guy's crazy with what he, acting like this, and when he stands back up and takes his mask off and it reveals that it's the Joker, you're like, of course, it's the Joker. Yeah, so I actually decided to use fraction as my sort of the way I wanted to do this next storyboard, and yeah, and I show my character in bits and pieces as it eventually, culminates in his full body picture in scene 7, and then moving on to 9, where he summons his sword and shows his magical power and slices through the beams and escapes from his prison cell. Moving on to week 4, I decided to finally actually retexture my character using Substance Painter and learning a bit more of the workflow in there. I utilized masks to apply textures perfectly to the things that I wanted to, and I think it worked really well. I attempted to add some grunge maps to the steel pieces of his armor, but I think that it sort of it makes the steel look really good, but I forgot to sort of do that with the gold, so his gold looks extremely polished and the steel looks very weathered, and it doesn't really work that well together, so I think I'm going to have to go back and play with that eventually, but got to move on to other things eventually. So speaking of moving on, I went on to modelling my test scene. I made a bunch of prison bars and a locked door and these sort of stone pillory bits, which were just essentially basic cylinders, as well as just extruding faces and everything to make these more interesting shapes rather than just a square. I also made a bunch of chain link loops stuff, where I made 2 chain links, and then I made a NURBS curve, at which point I parented the chain links to the NURBS curve and then used a motion path to duplicate the chain link along the curve, and that's sort of how I got these specific shapes out of it to make it look like the chains were lying on the ground instead of, scattered everywhere or whatever. I modelled a bucket, probably his poop bucket since he's in jail. It's got just a regular metal band, and then I just used, I decided not to model it all in one piece because I liked that the bits of wood, or the rectangular pieces of mesh that I used, sort of left a gap in between it. It's a little bit more interesting with the lighting. I think it will be. Not that everyone's going to be focusing on the bucket, but I made a bed, which is essentially just 4 rectangular pieces of mesh, which I used the sculpting tools to mess up a little bit to make it look like a messed up doona cover, as well as the stuff underneath the pillow and the cover probably going to be some sort of pile of hay that he's lying on. Yeah, moving on from the scene, I decided to I really wanted to try and use fluid simulation to make a realistic looking torch. At which point I found Sakamari's video on YouTube, and yeah, figured out how to make this super realistic looking torch light or firelight, which I think looks really cool. Although I think I need to play around a little bit more with the black, like, because it's a ramp, which is the color, so it goes from yellow. I think it goes from black to yellow to orange to red to orange to black, to simulate smoke. But I think the smoke's a little bit too too black. It's not transparent enough. Doesn't really look like smoke. Oh, it does, but not enough. Yeah, so that's something to move on to eventually later, or to play around with. Yeah, I think it turned out pretty well. Moving on, I did a test lighting scene. I just applied a Fong to all of the bars, because a Fong has a natural shininess to it, unlike the Lambert, the default Lambert shader. Yeah, so I also went and added a light into the center of the fluid simulation to try and simulate, well, a candle light, you know, a flickering light. Yeah, well, you can't see it here because it's a still image. But yeah, I think it looks pretty good. It's about as contrasty as I wanted it to be in my storyboard, because I wanted it to sort of light up one half of his body and leave the other one dark to sort of simulate that fraction introduction technique. But I don't know. I don't know. I got to test out some of the lighting things for a bit, I think. What's next for me? As I said, I'm going to play around with some more lighting stuff. Then I'm going to move on to maybe attempting to do a little bit of animation with the character. But I am going to look into a comment made on one of my previous uploads on Teams to maybe attempt to use something to switch out my character, because he's a little bit too high poly, and moving him around and stuff had a little bit of lag. It wasn't as bad as I thought it was, but yeah, anyway, lots of stuff to do. Let's see how far I get in my next update video 2 weeks from now. Bye.